So here we're going to talk about the cost of living crisis and how people can build wealth even despite certain things being out of their control, even despite certain
Right.
financial struggles. So yeah, to be helpful to the average person, like
Right.
what does keep people back from building wealth and living the life they want, living life on their terms?
Yeah. So I think me personally, and kind of a little bit of background for people who tune in.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I'm not a financial advisor. I say this in a lot of my articles. If you have questions about specific, like person specific investment, person specific wealth strategies, go and consult a professional. Help them understand your risk portfolio, and your risk preferences. Because I think that's one thing that we've seen, Brandon, definitely since I started college, and specifically since I switched to investment and finance, which was about, I don't know, 2021. Post COVID, we've seen a lot more people enter the markets. We've seen things like Robinhood, Tasty Trade, Webull start to take off. And specifically with the advent of mobile trading apps, we saw a
yeah,
lot of people jumping into trading and investing during COVID. And I think a lot of people got burned because,
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I mean,
building,
I never tell people that trading is the best way to go, but I
yeah,
kind of feel like
yeah,
maybe some of them, maybe Robinhood, were kind of like making it making the incentive to trade too high and not like more focusing on the investing for the long term, which is really more the building wealth route
yeah,
versus day
yeah,
trading. Yeah, what do you
yeah,
think
for
about it?
sure. Oh, no, I 100% agree. And I think, one of the things, back to the first question that you brought up of what, what's stopping people from building wealth? I think education is a big one. So,
Like,
if you and I were to just join Robinhood out of the blue, and maybe we saw on Reddit that GameStop did really well, and so now we're going to go hop on Robinhood or Webull and start, investing in a mobile app. Maybe that's something we haven't done before outside of a 401k, or maybe not at all. People hop on and they buy, I don't know, Nike. That was the first one I ever bought. And they see like, oh man, it's green, like the line's green and it's going upwards. That's probably a good thing, right? But then it turns red and people panic. And see, if you had the
yeah,
understanding underneath it to be like, okay, I invested in this company based on them doing this, this, and this is what I believe it's actually worth, you wouldn't have nearly as much. You'd save yourself from some of that risk and you'd build more wealth because you're not panic selling at every moment or buying the dip, which is something I think is kind of crazy when you really stop to think about it. So,
it's crazy to buy the dip.
yeah, specifically if you don't know what you're buying, you
Right,
know,
exactly. That's the difference.
yeah, I think it all comes back to the education part.
Agreed.
Um, if people lack a basic understanding of personal finance and they lack an understanding of how the stock market works, of how to price something,
Yeah. Then
then you
those
don't
red
really know
days,
what
like
you're
yeah, where
buying.
true. And then when you see those red days, you're like, oh, what's this happening for? And that kind of forces someone to panic sell. It's because of the lack of the information, they didn't really do like the due diligence, understand what
Right.
they have, and I think that's kind of almost just like kind of understanding the cycle of things. I mean, it's kind of like life, right? Like even life
Yeah.
has like ups and downs. You're not gonna have a good day every day. It's kind of the same with a company. So I
Yeah.
mean, I've always been more interested in like the long term outlook, like what's this company trying to do for the next 5 years, and so that's why I don't check markets like every day because I'm more of like a year by year kind of guy. So I and kind of more like the monthly and weekly routine. So I'm not the one who like checks markets every day. But yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
thinking more long term has kind of always been my philosophy, and that's kind of what wealth building is, honestly. Because
Yeah.
when you're more looking at the price every day, you're more like thinking of making moves or something like that, and kind of gets you in that panic selling. But doesn't that kind
Right.
of put you in a you need to be in control of your emotions, right?
Yeah, 100% agree. And, I just got to kind of paint a picture. I just got burned by that not too long ago. So, about 2 or 3 days ago, uh, I bought some Ford because for people who are watching us, I'm not a trader. I'm not like an investment manager. I had some money saved in a Robinhood account, and I was just playing around with it. I had it invested in a couple stocks that I really didn't want to hold anymore, and so I've just been playing around. It's been kind of successful, but I had a case where it's like I had made some money, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't want it to just sit there. I want it to be working for me, and so I bought Ford,
Exactly.
and it dropped, and so I sold it. It dropped like 5% that day, and I was like, oh, this isn't going anywhere. Because in the background of my head, I'm like, oh, well, the economy's not doing well. Trump's threatening tariffs. Fords are made with a bunch of parts out of Mexico. And, that means they're probably just going to keep falling. They've been falling all year so far. It makes sense why they would continue to do that. And so I sold. Today, when I hopped on and looked at it, it was up by quite a lot, way more than I had originally planned. Give me 1 second.
But yeah, so things can certainly change from the day to day.
Absolutely, which is why you kind of need to be in control. You don't want to be in a moment where you panic.
At the mercy of your emotions, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
it's like more using the emotional side, and it's almost like sometimes emotional decisions aren't always the best decisions.
Yeah. In my life, emotional decisions like marrying my wife was a really good idea, but generally, a lot of times where I let my emotions get in the way, it ends up burning me pretty bad. So.
And I imagine the wife was probably, you've sat in the emotion for like more than a day.
Yeah. It wasn't, hey, we're going to go get married. It was months and months. So.
Yeah, so that's all. Yeah, I'm thinking like, do I want this? That's kind of how I view investments. Not fully like a marriage, but it's like I usually my favorite investments are the ones that I want for life. Like, I want this for my life. So that's kind of the way I think of it. So not a bad way to approach things. And like, you really want to commit the rest of your life to this asset, or if you're more just a beginner investor, that is when it does make sense to like try things out, kind of learn along the way.
Right.
But that's where the education is so important. Is that the more education you have, the less mistakes you make.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've lost money in the stock market too. But I mean, that's when I was a newbie and didn't know what I was doing, and so learning those lessons is like how you learn, right?
Right. And
so yeah, I mean, oh yeah, you go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you were already talking. Finish what you were saying.
I was thinking of changing topics a little bit to because we were talking about like the emotional investing and that side of it, and I'm thinking, money can be such a emotionally charged topic, and sometimes that comes from it being like a taboo topic, and like. We don't talk about money a lot in society, and sometimes it's kind of like shunned to talk about money. And that can kind of lead to these emotions where you're like, don't know what you're doing, things like that. And it's like, yeah, panic sell because it's going down. So, I mean, just having more conversations about money that is one of the habits that rich people do. Like, people who have a lot of money have regular conversations about money. So, even if you don't have a lot of money, just talking about money is like a good first habit to start getting comfortable with the emotion, and so don't get caught off guard with emotions when it comes to money. But yeah, I mean, how was growing up money for you? Was the topic of money kind of taboo in your household?
So,
or what was that like?
I feel like I had a very different upbringing than most. So my dad is a reformed drug dealer, totally turned his life around, and he actually became very successful in specifically finance and owning small businesses. That was kind of his thing.
Oh, nice.
And I have a lot of those in my family. So I think I'm the anomaly here where we talked about money a lot. We didn't really talk about it much growing up. Like, I didn't know what my parents made. I do now. And my wife is in a very similar position. But as we've gotten older, and especially as I've learned more about it, it's become a bigger topic. But it was never like we don't talk about money topic. It was more, when I was growing up, it was more, hey, learn to work hard. Don't spend everything you own.
Yeah.
Everything you earn. Yeah. And more along that lines, not so much investing. We did talk about it. We did talk about investing. Like, one of my dad's stories is he won at the University of Indiana. He won their stock presentation competition.
Oh, whoa.
Made $1,000. He's had several stories like that in a row. And So I knew about the investing world and I knew about the wealth building world, but I was 11, I didn't really care. And then now as I'm
Yeah.
older, and it was never really about that. It was more like, hey, get a good job, be honest, be hardworking, the American dream lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a taboo, but it definitely wasn't like, hey, how are we going to take that money you saved up from your summer job or the lemonade stand and invest it in the S&P? I wish it had been that way.
Yeah.
If I kid you not, if I had switched my degree path when I was 22, like I had originally thought of doing when I was a kid, and had stayed on the investment side, because I wanted to be an investment banker when I was in high school for a very short amount of
Okay.
time, and didn't end up studying that, haven't ended up there. If I had stayed in finance, I would have learned about GameStop, Nvidia, and the huge S&P bump that we've had before they happened. I wouldn't have been able to say like, oh, I could have accurately predicted it. Probably not, but I would
You
have
would
been
have
in a
had a baseline
position.
of the financial literacy skills
Yeah, I would have
to
had
know
the
what to
skills, and
do.
I would have changed how I used my money, because that's really the important
Oh,
part. I
yes.
maybe would have invested more, and I would have been able to take advantage of that growth, because we didn't see Nvidia take off until what, 2022, 2023. I mean, it was
Yeah,
slowly growing because they made
but then, but
stuff
then
for
it,
video games, but
right. But then it inserted itself into like the Magnificent Seven,
right,
the biggest stocks in the S&P 500 that are pretty much driving most of the growth.
right,
And yeah,
and
I mean,
it's no, I was just going to agree. I think it's 47% of the growth right now is coming from Mag 7 stocks in the S&P. I could be wrong on that, could be lower, but something
something
like
like
that.
that I remember, yeah. Okay, so yeah, the financial literacy side of it is important, and that's kind of
Mm.
yeah, you and I are both proponents of education and knowing what you're doing. And so your parents were sort of trying to teaching you slowly, I'd say. Like,
Yeah.
don't teach about the basic stuff, especially work hard, the American dream. American dream's an
Right.
interesting topic because some parts I feel like the American dream is not really a thing in today's world
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like the instructions that you can come to America and just work hard and you'll be able to find success. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. So the person that only works and never does like because you get your paycheck, but then when you don't do anything with your paycheck, like you can't save your way to wealth, and that's where I kind
Right.
of see like the American dream as sort of broken a little bit. But I mean, so there is the next step of learning what to do with the money after you get paid.
Yes. And you are 100% right. Now, I don't know if I'm kind of torn on the American dream white picket fence idea. I
Yeah.
never really liked white picket fences, but um,
Yeah.
what
I mean, it's
what
kind of like
shocked
a traditional version of success, right? I mean, it's like this is what success looks like.
Mhm.
I think on some level, we all need to define what success means for us personally. So it's almost
Right.
like if you just go along with what society says is successful, like the white picket, is that kind of what you're getting at with the white picket fence vision of the American dream?
Yeah, well, that was
That might
more of a
not be
joke,
everyone's. Oh, okay, yeah, that might not
but
be everyone's dream or ideal vision of success.
what what shocked me was when I found out. I didn't know this as a kid. That's what we all learn growing up. At least if you're from the United States, you learn. Oh, you go to elementary school, you go to high school, you go and you get a job, you go and you buy a house, you start a family, you have some kids,
Yeah,
save up for your retirement, your 401k,
yeah.
and then you retire and you die. It's been kind of that's
That's like
been,
the status quo vision of success, right?
yes, yes. But when we dig a little bit deeper, and I know, there's some voices out there, like I can't remember if this is Grant Cardone who brought this up, but there were several voices I heard about 2 or 3 years ago where like, that's great if you're a bank. If you're a bank in the
Exactly.
United States and you don't even need to bring up that as a marketing tool, and everyone just believes that the steps in life are high school, student debt, mortgage, 401k, that is your dream as a banker, because you have a 100-year annuity that will always do the same thing. But if we look back on history, we see how it's not that black and white. You know, we look back in 2008, and it was you could argue, the American dream that helped cause the crash. It was the idea of, oh, everyone needs to own a home. And you got to be careful
And then
with
the
that.
mortgage companies giving out mortgages to people that had no hope of paying it back. So I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Because, you know, from like the investment analyst, finance nerd side of me, I would say that what really caused that was really poor debt management,
Risk management. Yeah.
really poor risk management, taking a whole bunch of really crappy mortgages and packing enough
Yeah.
of them into a box to make it look like it was valuable is what really
Yeah.
caused it.
Right.
But the American dream was part of it. Everyone had believed
Yeah. Everyone
that,
wanted to. They
yeah,
needed to own a home to be successful,
yeah,
or to have that like stamp of approval or something like that.
yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, yeah, there is the side of like shelter being one of like a basic human need. We all need
Right,
shelter, but
right,
I kind of view like, yeah, because the housing crisis is almost like a part of a cost of living crisis. But when I talk about cost of living crisis, I'm referring to everything. But of course, the
yeah.
housing crisis is included in that, the price of housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I kind of see that. I mean, yeah, what do you think of like, how do you see like the causes of the housing crisis? Everything's kind of like supply and demand, but I see like shelter is a basic human need, right? We all need it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the extra demand that comes from investors trying to invest in real estate. Like that pushes the demand and the price of housing a lot higher. So it's kind of like you're asking real estate and just like general housing to fill those really big demand sources of a basic
Right.
human need, but also one of the greatest wealth generators of the last century, certainly. And so I kind
Right.
of view on like, is real estate the best like investment, especially from a conscious investor point of view? Like when you're looking at real estate as an investor and you contribute to that demand, I kind of see the moral dilemma of contributing to the housing crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, well, what are your takes on like real estate and how that relates to the housing crisis?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you one thing that kind of, and this connects. So at a basic level, we need to remember that the thing that we're dealing with now that I guess hasn't been done before, I'd have to go back and look at the history and the literature to see if we have other cases where something like this, like post COVID, has happened at this scale. But what happened after COVID is central banks all over the world emptied their short term lending accounts to give everyone the stimmy checks, right?
Yeah,
And that
and a
drove
lot
up the
of
cost of everything.
yeah,
You
that
know,
was like debt. That was basically inflation, right? That was kind of like all the debt kind of led to all the massive inflation that we saw like a year or two later.
right,
Yeah, 2021, everyone was like, double digit inflation.
right. It 100% was. And you know, it's actually, I looked at the numbers not too long ago. We never reached the like 1980 levels of inflation.
No,
So
yeah,
I'd have to go back and look at that and see, like, okay, what happened? But the one thing that I've never seen before, I have never seen central banks empty their pockets on that scale. So we had
yeah,
that going on in the background, where the average person all of a sudden was getting $2,000 to $5,000. I don't remember what the exact numbers were,
yeah. That
consistently,
was
like every quarter. And you add that to the fact that around the same time, China, who got hit the worst, decided we're just going to lock everything down. We're welding doors
yeah,
shut. I mean, people have seen the videos, right?
yeah.
So all of the foreign investors and specifically U.S. investment firms that had money over there in Chinese real estate, in Chinese companies, left. They came back to the States.
Yeah.
And so you had all this money that was not being deployed and uh, was not being deployed. It was not making them a meaningful return. So where do you park it? Well, Redfin told us that people like BlackRock Holdings Group parked a bunch of that money in real estate. They bought up
Yeah.
whole neighborhoods in Las Vegas, in Atlanta, and jacked the rent up. So there's multiple things going on around there.
True.
But unfortunately, housing is one of those things that doesn't really come down. It's a major inflation driver, and it takes a long time to slow. So,
Yeah, yeah, houses are always increasing. That's kind of,
right.
the price of anything is determined by supply and demand. So it's like
Mm.
the supply is trying to keep up with the demand, but the demand is just too
Yep.
great for housing. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at, is like the demand of both like basic human need, but also like real estate investors. And yeah, the companies like Redfin and that are buying up all the
Right.
properties, like that all just, they're both factors that contribute to the demand and push up the price.
Right.
So that's how I'm always like, why is this happening? That's how I always approach things. And yeah, inflation. Inflation was kind of that's kind of my original nemesis. That's kind of when I was a kid, I I learned about inflation maybe around the age of like 11 or so, and at the time it just kind of just shattered my paradigm, my whole reality of how the world works, because I feel like I was kind of just a natural saver and kind of like a big dreamer. I'm like, oh man, I would love to make this happen. Sorry, it might be some loud noises here. Would love to make this happen, but I think that might take like $1 million or however much. And so that's kind of how my original plan was like, okay, I need to make $1 million to make this dream happen. I can maybe make that happen in like this many years, but like I was prepared to work like years, decades to save up to make enough to make my dream come true in that sense. Then I learned about inflation. I'm like, wait, what? You mean my savings are like always losing their value? I'm like, that means I'm like, will I ever be able to make this dream come true? So inflation kind of like, for me, that's kind of what scared the shit out of me and made me motivated to learn everything about how money works and about how inflation works, so I can kind of beat it.
Right.
I don't think most people are as like stressed about inflation as me. Where do you kind of lie? You kind of like how concerned you are on about inflation in general.
Well, I feel like everyone should be, and I don't want to be the like. I hate the doom and gloom people. You know, I was listening to Rand Paul the other day, and I had to turn it off. Love Rand Paul to death. I think he's got a very good head on his shoulders, and what he says is fairly logical and based in data. But he went off, and I was like, okay, I need to take a break.
Yeah, too doomsday, you're saying?
A little bit, yeah. And what people need to remember is inflation actively steals your wealth. And in theory and in history, you can escape that, because in the past, I think there was a paper, it was done by, I can't remember if it was the World Economic Forum or the University of Zurich or who it was, but they released a paper showing how inflation deflation affected GDP in Europe over the last 300 years. And, what you see is this pattern of cycles where inflation comes, it builds this bubble, it pops, deflation start over and over and over again.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot more of that since the 2000s. In my lifetime, we've seen a more persistent inflation. And maybe it was beforehand. I'm not old enough to know what like the 80s or the 70s were like.
70s was a high inflationary decade. Same with the 40s. Yeah. That's kind of like the 1940s and the 1970s, and now kind of repeating in the 2020s. These inflationary decades.
Right. So you have these periods, and especially since we now have central banks all over the world that are horrified of deflation, and companies that are leveraged out their eyeballs on debt, inflation is the best option for them, because they're like, oh, it keeps our debt cheap.
Exactly. Inflation is good with debt. I'm saying I don't like either of them. Like, let's get rid of inflation, let's get rid of debt.
I'm with you on both of those. That's just the world we're in. And so for people at home, you can pretty much expect inflation to be around that 2 to 3% or higher pretty much consistently.
I think we might get back to 10% by the end of the decade. By 2030. I think inflation will start to tick up, kind of in these waves, but kind of looking at the 70s and the 40s, it's kind of like repeating that process. In those decades, it kind of had waves of reaching 10% or double digit and coming back down. But yeah, part of it is kind of I kind of hear the people that are doomsday, and I don't really, I've always been an optimist, and I am an optimist. Thinking about inflation, I went into problem solving mode. So I'm like, what's the actual problem here? And then that's how we find the solution. And I mean, I think the world's changing a lot, and that kind of
Right.
puts a lot of people in something of a fear state, like fear of change and like not knowing what's going to happen and fear of the unknown, all those things. And so,
Right.
what I see is like the cost of living crisis is like the problem is not getting better. Like inflation makes more and more people not able to afford the cost of living year after year. So it's like the problem is
Right.
not getting better; it's getting worse. So it's
Right.
like something does need to change. And I kind of
Mhm.
I've looked at the financial system, and I kind of think that like it's kind of feeds off each other. Like deflation and our current financial system are kind of incompatible. Like yeah, central banks, like you said, are terrified of deflation. But what does
Mhm.
deflation even mean? Like if inflation is really just the rise in prices, deflation just means like prices lowering, which would be good for the average individual. It's just that in the current environment, deflation only reflects itself in like recessions and depressions and things like that.
Yeah.
But
Well, and we
if the whole world's changed, yeah, what's up?
no, you're 100% right, and we have to be careful. There's lots of voices out there. If you just look up
Yeah, yeah,
like, is deflation bad, or is like, what is deflation, you'll hear tons of different voices
yeah,
from very experienced and very well studied people.
yeah.
So it kind of depends, because in our modern definition, that is what deflation is reducing the cost of a basket of goods. It wasn't always that way. If we look back at like the 30s and 40s, the definition of inflation and deflation had to do with money supply.
Right. I mean,
But
they're kind of two sides of inflation. They're kind of both
yeah,
right.
yeah. Um, However, given the situation we're in, as much as I would like it to happen, deflation is bad. And so
I think in
governments,
yeah.
well,
Yeah, I
it's,
think
everyone's going to
deflation
try
is
to stop
bad in
it.
the current environment.
Yeah,
The central banks
because
are
it's
going
going
to
to be
try and stop
painful.
it, and the government. Yes, because of the debt.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um,
But I'm thinking we're getting to a point where, sorry, yeah, loud noises
you're good.
here. I think we're getting to a point where kind of what's good for government, what's good for banks, isn't what's good for the everyday person. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, like I always say, I'm like, it's not about red versus blue. It's about the people versus the establishment. And like when
Right.
the establishment gets us to fight about like red versus blue, I'm like, that's not productive to the people.
Yeah.
So I mean, I kind of see some of those things like, I mean, yeah, it's the same thing of getting the education. Like, why don't we learn about money in school?
Right.
Right.
And
And
like, who benefits from our ignorance?
exactly.
So I think and that's the real thing about the education is like, how do you absorb the information and then translate that into real life and what's happening and try to make your life better and try to make your community better and things like that.
Right.
No, and you hit the nail on the head there, is who benefits from us not knowing about finance, economics, investment, personal finance? Who benefits from that?
True.
And it's
Awesome
a fairly
question.
short list. And, I'm not let me be very clear. I'm actually not anti-establishment.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm not either.
anti-fraud, and
Right.
I'm anti-mismanagement. But I
Exactly.
think,
I
I
meant,
think that's an important distinction, because what you and I are talking about is not, oh, we should tear it all down. It's,
right.
oh, we should fix it.
Yeah, so that
Because,
starts with identifying the problem and then
right,
finding solutions to the problem.
right, exactly. We're on the same page here. Just for people who are watching it later, it's like we're not saying, oh, shut down the Fed, shut down the federal government. However, if you have a generation of people who are not taught about finance and not taught about personal finance, you can
And the
basically
same generation
rebuild.
having a mountain of debt,
Yeah,
like not
and you
being able to
can
afford the cost of living.
rebuild um, the factory towns of the 1800s and the early 1900s on a much larger scale. It's just, instead of shop tokens or plant tokens like they had, it's the U.S. dollar, because
Yeah,
everyone,
exactly.
they go through school and they take out all this debt, they have to pay it back,
Yeah.
and you're stuck there. You can't actually move forward and build wealth for your kids, your grandkids, your future, because you weren't taught about how to fix this. And so it's perfect. And it's even better when you then have people at the government side that says, oh man, we really want to spend all this money to build out whatever. Social Security, turn it into bombs and blow them up in the Middle East, whatever it happens to be. It actually doesn't matter politically where the money is being spent.
Well, actually,
It allows them to spend.
yes, indeed. Recently, what happened was the interest expense on the $35 trillion that the U.S. owes in debt, that surpassed what we spend on the military budget. I think we spend like $1 trillion per year on military. And
Yes.
the interest expense, like the interest on all the government's debt, surpassed $1 trillion per year, like last year, the year before that. But
Right.
to continue with your point.
Well, that was just it. Is, you know, when, sorry, I'm gonna get back up again. I apologize. I'm fairly ADHD, so if I like twitch, if I twitch, then just don't get too focused on my head movements or me getting up to do something.
Oh yeah, no worries.
So
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
we're just coming up towards the hour, so probably wrap it up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. What thoughts should we leave people with?
I did want to cover one of the
Yeah.
questions that you brought up on your list, just because I think it's worth mentioning, and it reminded me about this. I don't remember exactly what it was. Okay, yeah, here it is. Because the other thing, we really only covered one of the two-part, what I call the two-part problem about what's stopping people from building wealth, which education is the biggest one. The second one is actually what I feel like affects inflation more, which is frivolous spending. You know, you and I, advertising, here's the thing, advertising's big now.
Yeah, consumerism culture.
It convinces
the whole
us to
dopamine
consume.
rush. Yeah, instant gratification.
Yes. And so when you sent me this list of questions, I was like, okay, what is something that we could actually leave with people that could change their life tomorrow?
Yes.
And I was reminded of a kind of a test that I did myself. I invite everyone else to do it. And it's actually check your want list and your need list. So and there's two ways that you could do this. I did this both ways. The first one is you could literally ask, you would take a piece of paper and say, if money and time were not an issue, what would I want? And what would I want out of life? And you just make the list.
Yeah.
And you'll realize by like line 8, you don't have anything else to add, because you start to think of the things like the yachts, the private jets, the fancy cars. They just become a hassle after other needs are covered. You could do it too if you wanted to add a dollar amount too. Like the other way that I did it is someone asked me, if I had $1 billion in cash, what would I do with it?
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out how to spend more than like 100 million, and I was really reaching there. So
yeah, I know, right? Yeah, there's only so much you need and then wants, and then I actually wrote an interesting piece about these 6 types of wealth. Money is only one way you can be wealthy, but at a certain extent, money is just a thing. Without some of the others are like health, relationships, experiences, knowledge, and time. Like those are all other currencies that you can measure your wealth in.
Right.
So I hear that. At a certain point, money has diminishing returns in terms of like satisfaction.
Oh, for sure. And at some point, it becomes a hassle. You know?
Yes.
Like, think about, for example, the Jeff Bezos scandal from a couple of years ago. He buys this yacht, and he builds it in a port where the infrastructure of the city is too low to the ground to get the yacht out of harbor. So that's what I mean. Like, good for him. He has a $300 billion yacht or whatever the frick it was, right? It's now a hassle. You have to maintain it. You have to staff it. You have to keep it clean. You have to keep it painted every couple of years. You have to register it and then pay that registration every year. You have to insure it, right? So
kind of gets into the realm of what's an asset and what's a liability.
Exactly. And so before we leave, and I want to turn the time over to you as well to like add any final thoughts, but as an average viewer and as as an average person, if you really want to put yourself in a better position financially to start building wealth, take a look at what you actually want.
Exactly.
Start there. And once you realize what that list actually is, you can take the excess that you were going to use to buy the next iPhone or the next Gucci bag or the next
And
pair of
dedicate
like
it to that.
Nike shorts that you didn't actually want to begin with. You just thought you
Yeah.
wanted it because who knows, maybe your favorite basketball player wore it or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you turn that around and make it work for you and start buying assets, start buying the stock market,
Then you pull all your money together and it's all working for you to get what you
Yeah.
really want. That dream you
yeah,
identified.
exactly.
I'm a big
So-
proponent of that too. I always think it's easier to like, it's kind of like, what's your why? Like, why do you want to be wealthy? And yeah, just what do you want? And then once you know what you want, then the next step is figuring out what you need in order to get what you want. And that's why I like the whole
Right.
planning of making the money work to make it happen. And yeah, so I
Right.
mean, part of that is like, what do you want? And then how much does that cost? Like, how much do you need to save up for it?
Mhm.
Especially in
Yeah.
terms of like retirement planning or like financial independence number. Like, what would, in your dream life, yeah, like with money's not a problem. Like, how much do you want to spend in a year? And if that's like $100,000, multiply that by 25, that gets you like $2.5 million. So
Right.
in that example, $2.5 million is like, that's the number you need, and you'll be financially independent for the rest of your life, depending on not being a victim of lifestyle inflation and rising your expenses
Right.
as well. So
Right.
okay, so yeah, so then like think of how am I going to get to 2.5 million? It can seem like a lot, but I mean, just building the habit of investing, even if you start small with something like $10 a week, $10 a month, just building the habit
Right.
and then increasing that over time, let compound interest do the heavy lifting, and that's how you make your dreams come true, from
Yeah.
my eyes, in the investor's approach.
I 100% agree. And you know, because I imagine when people are going to watch this back, one of the things they're going to say, because I'm in that position right now, where it's like, oh, well, what if you can't afford to invest at all? And you know,
That's what I'm
there's
saying. I mean, that's what I'm saying about the cost of living crisis. I mean, like
Right.
70% of people in the U.S. live paycheck to paycheck. It's like there's
Yeah.
something societal that is like preventing us from building wealth.
Right. And you know, I 100% agree with that. I think if a lot of people actually took a look at their spending, they'd realize that
Yeah.
they're spending way more on things they don't actually need. But also, if you're in a position where you're not where you want to be in terms of annual income,
Yeah.
learning and education is part of that. And I'm not
How
saying
you
necessarily
yeah.
financial education. If it's you're
No,
a
just learning
journeyman
skills.
carpenter
Exactly.
and you
Learning
want to become
skills
a
is how you
master,
increase your income.
that's investing. You know, that's
Exactly.
going to pay you an annuity forever for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
So
Investing in yourself, what I call it.
yeah,
One of the ways
if
to
you
invest
can't
in
do it in
yourself.
money, do it in time.
Exactly.
You know, do it in improving your skills. And then when you have the money, do it then.
Exactly.
Because you're right. There's a lot of people who can't afford it right now. And it is a shame.
They can't afford to invest their money. So yeah. So then
Yeah.
look at your other currencies based on my like 6 types of wealth.
Right.
I mean, yeah, the time you can invest your time, you invest your relationships. That's basically like your network is your net worth kind of thing. Invest in your health. Actually, it has a correlation with becoming wealthy with money as well.
Yeah.
Experiences and knowledge. That's
Yeah.
the education. Invest in your knowledge. YouTube, like yeah, with the information age, like we have information at the palm of our hand. So it's like it's not information that's holding you back. So it's free to invest in your knowledge as well. It's usually what I recommend to people who can't invest their money yet.
Yeah. Take advantage of YouTube University. It's
Exactly.
the largest collection of trainings on planet Earth, I think.
Indeed, absolutely.
You know, for people again watching at home, I don't know if you watch this, Brandon, but like right now, you can watch Harvard iLab's entire startup school class from start to finish, the entire like 10-week course or whatever in video format right now for free. So, you know, I'm right there with you. Like if you can't do it with the US dollar, how else are you actually going to do it? How are you going to improve your own life in other ways?
Totally. I mean, assets. Buy assets, invest in assets, but you yourself are an asset. So invest in yourself.
Yeah.
One of the best investments you can make.
Right.
All right, yeah. If anyone's watching this back has other questions, other things we didn't cover that you'd like us to cover, let us know, and we'll cover that in the next one.
Yeah.
You got anything else to send people off with?
No. And I don't know what the Money Nomad's going to be doing, but for people who watch this later, if you have questions, you can message me at Wealth and Wisdom here on Substack. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm happy to answer any questions. I might not have the answer, but if you have questions, you say, hey, I want to learn more about X or Y, let us know. Like, reach out. And because I don't know about you, Brandon, but for me, that's where I get the most satisfaction out of doing this thing on Substack, is being able to actually answer questions answer people's pain points, things that they actually care about.
Exactly.
I can ramble all day long about supply and demand. No one seems to care.
Yeah.
So and that's okay. Yeah. But let us know what you actually want to hear.
Exactly. And then together we learn.
Perfect.
All right. Have a good day then.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Take care of yourself, and we'll chat soon.
Okay.
Bye, Tyler.
Figure out how to leave. All right.